Nation is based on a book I recently published called America's New Map. The story I'm going to tell you begins with U.S.-style globalization, an international liberal trade order born of American ambition after the Second World War. That dynamic sweeps the planet, transforms it, gives us three structural changes this century. First, demographic transitions, the price of admission to global value chains. Climate change, the mother of all externalities. And the prize, a majority global middle class for the first time in human history. Any one of those three would herald a new era in world affairs all by themselves. Together, they are going to trigger North-South integration on a scale almost unimaginable from historical perspective. So that new international economic order is coming, whether we want it or not. That process of integration dovetails with a regionalization imperative that we've seen really since the great financial collapse of 2008, but accelerating most recently. It reflects a logical consolidation of supply chains around the world in response to the fact that Asia is now largely risen. At the same time, it triggers a superpower brand war over that majority global middle class, increasingly located in the global south. We are entering an era, about 4 or 5 decades, when those three big structural changes will play out very dramatically. This zone of turbulence is going to be difficult to imagine and difficult to manage. Scientists tell us that species all over the world have to adapt, have to evolve at 10,000 times the normal rate. So the choice for all species, because of climate change, is basically adapt, move, or die. Most species on the planet are going to die in the next 4 or 5 decades. But people are going to be put on the move like crazy, and communities, enterprises, nation states are going to be forced to evolve. Nobody who goes in at this end is going to look the same coming out this end. And that's especially true for India. The U.S. system of globalization, the world order that we birthed and nurtured and defended these last 7 decades, it's built on rules. Globalization comes with rules, but not a ruler. The success of that situation, beyond doubt, for the first time in human history, something that I was told my entire life until very recently was absolutely impossible. And frankly, geopolitical analysis today totally ignores the fact that we've created a global majority middle class, which is huge. America wanted peaceful multipolarity. Frankly, we got it. Despite all the talk about going to war with China and Washington right now, it's amazing how peaceful our multipolar world is. Okay, that multipolarity, frankly, scares the hell out of the average American, especially older Americans, because it's not a world they grew up in. But we're getting used to it. To navigate a demographic transition, to exploit it successfully, for urbanization, industrialization, integration into global value chains, very hard. Not only that, it's a one-way street. There are turning points in that journey, but there are no turning back points. The balancing of reduced fertility and the stockpiling of old people is very stressful. Japan is struggling with this dynamic right now, so is South Korea, so is much of Europe. China's century, so-called, curtailed overwhelmingly by this dynamic. The demographic dividend has, for the last several decades, enabled the sequential rise of power after power, each of them believing that they've come up with an economic model that's never been seen before and will allow them supremacy from here on out. And each of them are disabused of that vision. So enjoy your trajectory now, because you're going to get old like everybody else. I can track the history of globalization by a series of demographic dividends. It's now centered in Southeast Asia and shifting over time very rapidly towards India, which logically becomes the primary integrator of Africa, which is going to have the biggest demographic dividend of all time, about 1 billion. This map also fits my family. My wife and I had 3 kids, adopted 1 from China, adopted 2 from Ethiopia. So I've been working this process myself as best as possible. Climate is going to change everything. Lower latitudes are going to experience increasingly temperature and precipitation historically associated with the Saharan desert. This middle band, I call it Middle Earth, stretches 30 degrees north and south of the equator. Most of the global middle class that comes online in terms of consumption will do so in that band. That band encompasses a great deal of India, the majority. Species all over the world are moving towards the poles and up in elevation. Thousands and thousands of studies tracking this. Climate velocity shifts weather patterns around the world. History says humans follow. There will be the world's biggest real estate transfer over the next several decades. Roughly 1/10 of the world's land mass, 2 Australias, is going to disappear across that Middle Earth in terms of livability and airability. Magically, the same basic amount is going to appear in the new north, the northern quartile. No money's going to change hands in this transaction. And the irony is, of course, the people who caused climate change are going to get that extra land, and the people who didn't are going to lose that land. We have lived in a world for millennia, east-west in orientation. Jared Diamond, guns, germs, and steel. The wide parts of the world developed faster, conquered the tall parts of the world. Climate change reverses that logic. In a north-south world, it's better to be long. And quite frankly, it's better to be skinny. Less damage from climate change. Here's the problem set. We're going to look at unprecedented north-south integration, compelled by climate change. The South presents needs in this regard. The North tends to view this largely in terms of cost. The goal is obvious. We want to limit impact and boost resilience across lower latitudes, keep populations in place. Economic answer, traditional. Foreign aid, always too little. Foreign direct investment, often too late. Private money craves stability. And the future of that Middle Earth is anything but certain. Governments in this part of the world are going to see their farmland shrink and their cities boom. Some will not survive this process. They'll become failed states. Those that do become failed states will be viewed as military threats by many in the North, if only for sending their way climate migrants. If I live in this situation, the question is, should I stay or should I go? If I go to the city because I can no longer live off the land, I become subject often to informal economy exploitation and to criminal groups. I may give up, leave the country, go one country over. If I get tired enough, I head north, sometimes thousands of miles, oftentimes on foot. At that point, the North has a response, a political response: resettle or repel. Recently, Saudi security forces killed about 1,000 Ethiopians, all of them, I would argue, climate migrants coming over the border from Yemen, escaping a mega drought. Italian Coast Guard let a ship with 1,000 climate migrants sink in front of them, all hands aboard, drowned in the Med. A U.S. governor proposes shooting even women and children coming across the Rio Grande River. This dark future already arrived. I argue for a whole of government soft power response. The North needs to offer the South eventual membership in larger unions, socialize the risk, increase certainty, attract the foreign direct investment, keep resilient populations in place, extend security networks, depress threats. Superpowers are going to work their vertical slice, north and south, because pain prioritizes. We are entering an era of superpower brand competition for the heart and soul, or the stomachs and wallets, of that majority global middle class. These processes I describe are going to create a lot of geopolitical orphans, climate migrants, failed states. That triggers sort of a free agency mindset. If we had global free agency, if any country in the world could join any other union, any other franchise, I ask you to imagine which of the northern superpowers, to include China, would get bigger on that basis or smaller? Which global brand appeals the most? I will tell you, the Europeans have a brilliant brand. It is so attractive, the Russians need to invade their neighboring countries to prevent their defection to the EU and NATO. The EU is growing, 10 in the pipeline. That's how you win in the 21st century. You don't invade them, they choose to belong with you. Putin uses 19th century tactics, hostage-taking former Soviet republics, trapping them in frozen conflicts, denying them to the EU and NATO. The Russians are busy. What do they win for this? Deglobalization from the West, and they get to become China's economic vassal, because everybody loves a seller who's desperate to move product. The Chinese have their economic variant of integration. The Belt and Road Initiative is a good thing. Globalization needs the newly most integrated economy to thereupon integrate those coming up. That's how the process works. But the Chinese play a complex game. They want to achieve network centrality in your 5G network, in your Internet of Things, in your AI of things. And their ambition is ultimately to sell you safe city, smart city solutions that are really the makings of Orwellian omnivalence. So you get deeper and deeper into this process, and then you notice that the Chinese are operating secret police stations within your territory, which is a weird, subnational sort of intervention. I'm going to describe a quantum grand strategy where you go after individuals in other countries. You target them subnationally, you try to capture and fracture their identities, transmute their allegiances. When you go after that identity nucleus, you tap into all sorts of data pools, how they relate to others, how they transact, what media they consume, what worldview ensues. All that penetration, all that data collection allows your AI to get smarter and smarter and smarter. You begin to anticipate the needs. And the more you can do that, the more you can condition the target. So the goal here is to capture. Now, in the West, we have players who dominate each of those levels. In the West, they tend to compete. In authoritarian governments, they tend to collaborate. And that's when they can really get inside. Doesn't matter if you take the red pill or the blue pill, they got you. China's building that matrix, one country at a time, one smart city at a time, one citizen at a time. If you think a foreign government can't capture the allegiance of your individual citizens, I would say check out Vladimir Putin's hold on America's Trump right-wing base, which is absolutely amazing. Body snatching of the highest order. So we get to India. China, by all rights, should be integrating India in global markets and flooding this place with FDI. India is wary of taking Chinese foreign direct investment. I understand it. America would like to see India help it contain China. I think that's a terrible idea. The world doesn't need China to fail. India doesn't need China to fail. China needs India to succeed because India is going to be the integrator of note for Africa. We can't disrupt that chain. We need to extend that chain. So we talk about powers rising, being risen, being past their expiration date, so to speak, and we talk about countries starting out as market players and moving towards, aspiring to, being market makers. America cheated and stole its way to the top, like everybody has done throughout history. And as you get richer, you start to care about intellectual property and being interpreted as a respected stakeholder. We embraced a market-making role after the Second World War. That begat globalization. That identity crashed and burned around 2008. And we've seen America turn inward and very rapacious in its relations with the outside world. 2024 election, even with the rebound from Trump, it's not going to fix anything in America, whether Trump comes back or not. China aspires to be an ethical market maker. And it looked really good until Xi Jinping decided he was the only guy who can run that country from here on out. And everything's gone downhill since. So China's future is cloudy. India has a path forward. The question is, are they going to be more like Russia, ethno-nationalists, fascists, irredentists? Are they going to be more like the EU, transnational, supranational, universalistic appeal? India's got a complex road ahead. This is a map my country made. We have hard copies over there. You're willing to take them? I thank you for your time and attention.
Dr. Barnett, thank you so much, especially for explaining how climate change is going to be within the concept of changing and within the context of changing socio-economic policies also, which are perhaps required in that middle world. So it's wonderful that you've put all of that into perspective. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Global Business Summit.